So welcome to Supporting Siblings. My name's Bree and I'm so pleased you've joined us today for the first session in this 5-part webinar series. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we're all joining from today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I'm joining today from the lands of the Murrumbidgee people on Yuin Nation, and I do encourage you to share which lands you're joining from in the chat. So when a child in a family has a disability, developmental delay, medical needs, or autism, every family member is affected, including siblings. Yet their experiences, their questions, and their needs can sometimes go unnoticed or unspoken. Today, we're shining a light on the sibling experience because every story in the family matters. So this series is a partnership between Belongside Families and Siblings Australia, and across our 5 sessions together, we'll be exploring the sibling perspective from every angle. We'll combine expert presentations with real, thoughtful conversations between parents, carers, and professionals, giving you some practical strategies, some evidence-based guidelines, and lived insights to help strengthen relationships and build resilience in your family. So today's session is Understanding the Sibling Experience, and we're offering a gentle space to reflect on how siblings are affected when there's a diagnosis in the family. I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers today. We have Shannon, who is the Chief Executive of Siblings Australia, and Natalie, who is both a sibling herself and also a mother. I'm going to let them both introduce themselves shortly once we start. But today, Shannon and Natalie will guide us through a warm and informative conversation that recognises the complexity of family life while offering hope and practical support. So I'm going to hand it over to you two ladies.
Right, Bree. Nina Mani, that's hello in the Ghana language. I'm joining you from Ghana Yurta today during Reconciliation Week. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also recognise the cultural authority of any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us for this first session. We're really excited to be partnering with Belongside for this series. I have been the Chief Executive of Siblings Australia now for almost 2.5 years. I am not a sibling, I'm a parent. I'm a step parent of a little girl who has autism. She also has an intellectual disability, and so my children became siblings by virtue of their mum swiping right on Tinder almost 8 years ago. I'm joined today by Nat, and Nat is a sibling and she is a parent, and she's also an employee of Siblings Australia. But the reason I wanted Nat to come along today was she does have that experience as a parent, but having grown up as a sibling herself, she has that reflections that she can make on what her experience was growing up. And I think that might be really helpful in our conversation today. This is a conversation, Nat and I will sort of be back and forth, but please feel free to jump in at any stage. Nat, would you like to jump in and just do a bit of a brief bio of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm also joining you from Ghana country, same as Shannon. So as Shannon mentioned, I work for Siblings Australia. I've worked in the disability sector for about 15 years now. So have worked for organisations who provide direct service provision, and then most recently for Siblings Australia. I'm a sibling. I am the youngest of 3. I have an older brother with an intellectual disability. He never received a formal diagnosis. Being born in the early 70s, it was always just a label. And we're actually going down the pathway now of potentially getting an updated diagnosis for him now, which based on, experience and knowledge, I think he potentially would have an autism diagnosis, as potentially as well as an intellectual disability. So we're just navigating that pathway now. Yeah, and I'm also a mum. So I have 2 sons. One of my sons is neurodivergent as well. So
Awesome. Thanks, Nat. And I think it's that sort of those 3 pieces of experience that I think are going to be really beneficial for the people on the call today. Could you start, Nat, by telling us a bit about your personal journey, both as a sibling and a parent, and how that shaped your experience and understanding of what it's like to be a sibling?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I'm the youngest of three. Looking back surprisingly, since my time with Siblings Australia, I probably realised that, my childhood with a brother with an intellectual disability probably wasn't a normal childhood. There were certainly moments in my childhood that I thought, oh, that would have been quite confronting. Um, so I think a lot of my learnings from Siblings Australia, I've been able to pull experiences from my childhood. And then also as the parent working in the disability sector, I've been able to apply a different lens as well in the work that I do, and also in the way that I parent, in the way that am a sibling to my brother as well.
Yeah, thank you. From your perspective, what are some of the emotional or psychological impacts that siblings might feel, especially sort of in those early years after diagnosis?
I think, it varies and everyone's experience is unique. My experience is my experience, and everyone else will have their own experience. So, it's not just a blanket. Everyone will feel this particular way. There are siblings that have really joyful, loving, happy relationships. And on the other side of that, there are siblings that have, relationships based with a lot of trauma and conflict and, yeah, just a lot of complex feelings. So I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone's experience is just that. Yeah, that's really important. But I think also acknowledging that being a sibling does have its challenges. I grew up again in a time where institutions were still the norm. It was still quite okay to put your child with a disability in an institution. That's where they would live and that's where they would care for them. And that was the solution as such. And I think looking back, my parents didn't always advocate well for my brother. And that impacted my sister and I as siblings as well. He lived in the family home. And so a lot of those behaviours were played out in the family home. And of course, institutions are not the answer. And that's why we've sort of steered away from that pathway. But I think acknowledging that as a parent, you're doing the best you can with the knowledge and the skills that you have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of thinking about my own experience as a parent and conversations that you and I have had about parenting when you've got sibling children and children with additional needs in your household. The child we've got in my household has more significant care needs than your son does, but we've sort of talked about some of the things that go along with having a sibling child in your house. And I'm thinking too about a call you had yesterday with an adult sibling, and you were saying when we spoke about it afterwards that you had spoken to her about some of the conflict that perhaps exists within relationships that people put down to having a brother or a sister with a disability. It's not always that. Sometimes siblings just don't get along. And, I think there is that sort of thing that parents contact us and they say, we've got this sibling conflict that they're talking about, and it's potentially quite normal sibling conflict that's happening, and sort of how do you draw that line between what is frustration or fear or shame or some of those things that we know that sibling children feel, as compared to sort of regular sibling conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important that there are two factors to that. There is disability, which can impact relationships, but everyone has their own personalities as well. And if you took disability away, would the relationship be any different? I know for myself with my brother, I am the youngest, and we often don't have a good relationship. He gets frustrated with me. He thinks I'm the younger sister. What would I know? He doesn't want me telling him what to do. So I have to back off, whereas my middle sister is quite close to my brother. He'll tend to lean on her more for supports. He'll go to her more for supports. And I've started to think that's not necessarily about his disability. That's just him and I as people. So, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I look at my own children, and my sons are polar opposite. So my eldest and my youngest, who is neurodivergent, absolute polar opposites. And again, their personalities are so different, and they will butt heads and they will have conflict. And if I took the ADHD aspect of that away, would it be any different? Potentially not.
Yeah. But there are sort of some, I sort of touched very briefly in that about, you know, kids might feel anger, or they might feel ashamed of how they're feeling, or they might feel ashamed of behaviours and things. What are some of the things, both as a parent and sort of dealing with families with Siblings Australia, that you've come across some of those emotions that siblings do feel that, you know, the example I often give is I'm quite comfortable when we're at the playground, and if a parent wants to make a comment about my stepdaughter's behaviour, because she doesn't understand any of the social norms, she doesn't understand that you're supposed to line up for the slippery dip. She's a very large 10-year-old child who will move the toddlers out of the way so she can be the first one on the slippery dip. And I'm comfortable to say to other parents, well, you know, she's autistic, and I'm sorry, we're managing what's going on here. But I can see that my kids sometimes are like, oh my goodness, I just wish that people weren't looking at us because there's some difference going on at the moment. So what are some of those other emotions and things that you've come across either in your personal life or in your experience with Siblings Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, embarrassment, shame, and then the feelings around, why am I embarrassed of my brother? Am I a bad person that I'm embarrassed of my brother? Like, what does that say about me? So there's some of those like negative feelings. There's also feelings of, that increased sense of protection, and advocacy for, a brother or sister with disability. I know growing up, I certainly had moments where I was embarrassed of my brother, and I hate to say that now, I'm working in the sector, but I was embarrassed if I had to go to, ballet, and then my mum would send my brother in to pick me up. I was died of embarrassment, like, Mum, why did you have to do that? And then those feelings that I had, like, oh, I shouldn't really be embarrassed of my brother. That's, says more about me than anything. So those really complex feelings. And then on the other side of that, it's, that advocacy piece, or feeling like you needed to protect my brother, or, your brother or your sister. I know for my sons, my eldest son was always looked to by primary school in particular as, that carer space and that advocate for my younger son, which I was very strong about. That's not his role. He is here for his own education. He's not here to advocate for his brother unless he chooses to do that. We had lots of conversations at the school, like, oh, your brother's behaving really badly. Could you step in and support? And I had to step in myself and say, that's not his place. He's here in his own right. Unless he makes that choice, it's, that's not something that you can ask of him, because that then impacts his ability to, navigate his feelings. If he's having to step into a situation where he feels embarrassed and ashamed of his brother, or, whatever has happened, that's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah, and I think that agency piece is really important for siblings, not expecting that they will take that role, allowing them the space to do so when they feel comfortable doing it, gives them that real sense of self. There are 6 months between the two girls in our house, and my 11-year-old can get really fierce if people say anything about her stepsister, but it has to be on her terms. I recognise that, I can't expect her to be that person who is being that sort of warrior for her stepsister the whole time. It has to be the moments where she chooses to step into it, and like being very conscious of where do we draw those boundaries of, yes, it's normal to care for and support your brother or sister, but I don't want you to take on too much. I don't want you to be taking on effectively like a mini parenting role because there are additional needs for your brother or sister.
Yeah. And as a young child, you don't have the emotional bandwidth, I don't think, to take on board all of those situations and deal with them appropriately. So
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point too that you made about, you might feel ashamed or you might feel embarrassed about behaviors or different things that are going on. But, as adults, they are tricky feelings to reconcile anyway. But as a child who doesn't have that sort of experience and that understanding that, yeah, you can hold two truths at once. You can be embarrassed of the fact that there are some behaviors going on that are causing people to look at you. But you can still fiercely love your brother or sister, and you can feel bad that you feel ashamed in that moment, and it's all tied up together.
yeah, absolutely. And look, I know of families who don't have disabilities as a complexity, and their family relationships are far from perfect. So, the
Absolutely.
disability aspect, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Um, in your experience, and again, drawing sort of both on your personal and professional life, how have you found that siblings have processed the news that their brother or sister has a disability or neurodivergence? Sort of how has it differed at different ages and stages with people you've worked with or your own experience?
Yeah, I think the overarching important factor is, that open and honest conversation. It's not about hiding anything. It's about talking about a diagnosis, about what that potentially means. And you can obviously tailor those conversations for the different age groups. But yeah, that open and honest communication is really important. And what that means for all members of the family. A diagnosis doesn't mean that a child is going to have to take on a carer role. It shouldn't be assumed that that's the case. Um, yeah, so just that clarification. When a child is younger, like sort of I'm thinking up to 7 years, I think there's that less external influences which could impact their ability to process a diagnosis. So those that I tend to have those social aspects of school or sports or anything like that. And younger siblings tend to love their siblings for what they are without understanding the impact of their disability. So I think there's that aspect. And then as a child becomes more exposed to external factors, so school, friendship, sports, etc., it highlights a change in their feelings sometimes and their ability to process. And that's sometimes where we see those feelings of, shame or guilt or things like that sort of start to flow in. So again, I think it's just about maintaining those opportunities for open and honest conversations about how you're feeling.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the external factors too. I think about when my son and daughter met my now stepdaughter, and they would have been 3 and 6, I reckon, when they met her, and she was 3 at the time, and it was just a mum's boyfriend's got a little girl, and my daughter was, of course, super excited because there's a sister type person who she can play with, and we had to explain to her, well, no, she's autistic and she doesn't play how you play, and she doesn't talk and she can't understand what we're saying as well. But I think you're absolutely right that there is that, just when they are little, you can just tell them things and they don't have that external what this means, and you can really frame that discussion with them. So we explained to my daughter, she'll play alongside you. She won't play dolls with you, but we can set up Play-Doh and you can do Play-Doh together, and you're not going to be able to have a conversation with her because she doesn't speak and she doesn't understand language at this stage. And she just sort of accepted that. And similarly, when we had kids into our house when they were sort of in that younger that younger age group, there was just that, oh, okay, she's autistic. And they'd sort of toddle on with their day. As they all got older, there has sort of been that external stuff. But I think you're right. It's that discussion around what it means in age-appropriate language that's made them feel really like they're part of what's going on. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in trying to balance your time between your son who's got additional needs and your oldest son. And are you happy to share some of those stories?
Yeah, sure. And look, at different stages in the timeline, whether you're just going through the first diagnosis and then trying to implement therapies, disability can be all-consuming. Trying to maintain like an even balance between therapy appointments, school meetings, NDIS reports, oftentimes sways more in favour of your child with a disability. So I think, it's really important to make a point to make time with your other sibling children. So whether that's half an hour, let's get down the shops, get a milkshake, have a chat. How's your day been? Making those like dedicated times to go and see a sporting event together, a movie, whatever it is. And I know that it can be challenging. We all live very busy lives, and as parents of children with disabilities, we're even busier. So yeah, that would be my advice, is try and make that one-on-one time with your sibling children. Find out how they're doing, how they're tracking, explain to them, this is what we're going through at the moment. We're doing some more diagnostic testing, hoping to get some more support for your brother or your sister, so that sort of would then mean that I can spend some more time with you potentially.
Yeah. And for families who sort of can't carve that time out away from the house where there is sort of more complex needs going on, do you have any tips for families about how they might, where half an hour for a milkshake is sort of half an hour too much in the day?
Yeah, look, and it depends entirely on some of the supports that are in place, some of the funding that's in place. If you have capacity to have some respite, then that's a good option to sort of lock away some time with a sibling child.
Yeah.
If you can drop them to a therapy appointment, and unassisted, and they can, undertake their therapy without you being there, you can quickly get away. And it doesn't have to be getting away to, an external venue. It could be, let's go for a drive around the block for 20 minutes, have a conversation. As a parent with my kids, I find that some of the best conversations we've had are in the car.
Oh yeah, where you're not making eye contact and they don't feel like you're interrogating them. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the stories I get out of my teenage stepson when we're both sort of sitting side by side, and I get home and I say to his dad, "Oh my God, do you know that this is going on?" He's like, "How did you find that out?" I went for a drive. Just started talking. Yeah. Yeah, those car rides are amazing. And I think the other thing that parents also need to sort of think about is it doesn't have to be, yes, the parent relationship is so important, but those other adult people in your kids' lives are so important. And tapping the auntie or the uncle or your best mate or whoever and saying, "Hey, can you also be coming in and doing some of this?" I think, when there's disability in the family, people automatically go to, "Well, how can I support you with the child with a disability?" And you're already racing them to therapy. You're already sort of doing the different programs with them at home. It's the sibling child that perhaps you haven't got the time to sit down and do those things with. So, if your best mate can take them to the footy and have a conversation with them about what's going on in their life, or, take them to the beach for fish and chips. And the thing that I really encourage when I'm talking to parents about this is be really explicit with those other adult people in your life, that when you're asking them to do that with the sibling child, you don't want them to go out and say, "Hey, how are you going with the disability within the family? How are you going with your brother or sister who's got a disability?" Take them out and say, "Hey, how's school going? How are you finding, you've just finished your first term of prep. How was that? And tell me about your favorite friend at school, and the thing that you've really loved about starting school, and what's been scary about starting school." And don't have any of that conversation about the brother or sister. Make that really space for talking about them. And if they choose to talk about their brother or sister, don't shut that down, but make it really clear that this is about you and I want to know about you as a person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some strategies that you've found to help build connection and reduce resentment between siblings?
I think often the resentment piece forms when it's time. It's parents' time taken away from a sibling child, and all of that time is deemed to be spent with the child with disability. So again, I think, explaining why you need to spend the time right now, what it involves. A diagnosis is out of people's control. And for some people, given the opportunity, some people might say, I would rather not have this in my life. So I think it's just, reminding sibling children of that. Also explaining that, you're putting strategies in place to make it, the best life for everyone. And that includes parents, that includes child with disability, and also siblings as well. And I think reinforce that with their support and understanding, it makes the process a little bit easier too. And you have to be careful not to go down the guilt, I think, pathway with that. Definitely don't want to guilt them into this whole caring, understanding I have to be there. But yeah, I think just explaining and reinforcing that. I think the resentment piece is diluted when a parent is able to spend a little bit more focused time with sibling child. So yeah.
Absolutely. And we've spoken a lot about the challenges, Nat, but I can't sing Nat's praises more highly to everybody who's on this webinar. Nat is a phenomenal human being, and I know that it's not all to do with being a sibling, but there has been aspects of being a sibling that have shaped the person that she is. So what are some of those strengths that come from growing up as a sibling, either that you sort of look at in yourself and go, I'm glad that I've got this inside myself, or that you see in your older son or other siblings that you deal with?
Yeah, sure. I think for myself, I've developed a career in the disability sector. That's been a huge thing for me. We often see that with siblings, that they tend to go down the pathway of working in human services, whether it's disability or healthcare. And then, I think growing up, I've learned compassion and resilience as well. For my sibling son, compassion has also been a huge thing that he has learned, and has really assisted him throughout his high school journey. He graduated last year, and I think, having the compassion side of it, we don't see that a lot sometimes in teenage boys particularly. So that was huge. And then advocating for people, stepping in and, saying this isn't the right thing to do, or I think that advocacy piece has been huge for my older son and for me as well.
I think you're right about sort of that compassion, particularly in teenage boys. We've got 2 teenage boys in our house, and I often say to people about their beautiful hearts. Every time I meet your eldest son, I'm blown away by just what a beautiful human he is, and I think so much of that has been shaped for all 3 of those teenage boys that we're talking about, from the sibling experience and sort of understanding things outside of themselves. As parents, how do you think we can help our sibling children see those sorts of strengths in themselves?
Yeah, I think pointing out the good things, whether that's at school, around home, or through their friendships or sporting connections, whether they're always looking out for the underdog, taking people under their wing, or advocating for people, approaching things with a kind heart and, with good intentions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to come back and ask you another question before we completely wrap up, Nat. But Bree, I was wondering if we've had any questions through.
We have.
Yeah,
We've had one. So it comes from a sibling who seems to be a little bit further along in their journey, and may not have had the supports that you're talking about earlier in their life. So they're asking, if they've not processed everything that they went through as a child, what would you suggest the step is to take to be able to open up with their sibling who has a diagnosis? Obviously not wanting to upset their sibling or make them feel guilty. Because obviously you guys offer support not just for young siblings, you do a lot of support for adults as well. So maybe it might be best to speak to some of the support you can offer for adults, siblings.
Yeah, sure. Nat, do you want to jump in on that, or would you like me to do it from the...
I'm happy to jump in. I think, it's difficult. You can try and have those conversations with your brother or sister with disability, but dependent on their capacity on whether or not that would be a conversation that is successful. I don't think it's ever too late if your parents are still on the scene and still around, to have those conversations with parents. I think growing up in, 60s, 70s, parents tended to keep a lot of that information to themselves. They either didn't want to burden kids, or it was just a done thing, like, disability was kept behind closed doors. So I think having conversations with parents and saying this is how it's impacted me can be really cathartic as well. And sometimes parents have had no idea, they've done the best they can, and they have no idea on how having a brother or a sister with disability has impacted you. So yeah, conversations. And then Shan, you can probably expand on the supports that Siblings Australia provide as well.
Yeah, sure. So we've got a couple of different adult avenues for siblings that can offer support for those in sort of the over 18 age group. We've got Sib Chat, which is a closed Facebook group, and that's peer-to-peer support. It's moderated by Siblings Australia, but it's very much around siblings seeking support from other siblings. And, that conversation runs the gamut of experiences. It can be, I don't know how to have this conversation with my parents. I don't know how to have the conversation with my brother or sister, through to I've just taken my brother or sister on their first ever holiday, and I just want to share with a group of people who perhaps don't understand. Who perhaps do understand in a way that my peers don't, about what a significant milestone this is. And it's a beautiful, warm community that will really help siblings sort of address some of those questions. We've also got Sib Connect. We've got a group running in Sydney, but we've also got groups in Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And this is a peer support group run by trained and supported Siblings Australia staff who facilitate those groups. And those groups tend to come together about once a quarter. We have got counselling services available for people who need that sort of support. And we've also got a future planning site called Sibplan, which helps sort of navigate through when you are taking on that sort of more formal carer responsibility as a sibling. So they're all available on our website, and I know Bree will be sending out some resources both today.
The chat. The chat's been asked. Can you post the link to that group? So we'll make sure we definitely ensure that in the resource email. We have just had a couple of more questions in the chat if everyone's happy to hang on for a minute or two. We've had a question around, I have two girls with 5 years between them, and my youngest adores her older sister who is autistic and has ADHD and has some big challenges with emotional regulation. How do we tease out if the siblings' concerning behaviours are, one, in response to the impact of the disability in the family, or two, their own expression of the same disability, particularly with autism or ADHD, or something entirely separate that has been going on for them?
Yeah.
This is a tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one.
Calling it to Nat.
I had to give you a curly one.
It's a tricky one, and look, I'm probably not going to have all the answers. I would definitely say from my own experience with my sons, and it was sort of reversed order. So my youngest is neurodivergent and my oldest son doesn't have any diagnosis. Having said that, there were still times when I would see some of the behaviours replicated by my older son, and I would have to, have that conversation of, this is not how we behave. We can do better than this. We could approach this from a different way. And then there would often be those bite backs of, oh, well, so-and-so does this, or so-and-so behaves like this, or so-and-so did this at school. And again, then it's just, reminding him about, well, he doesn't always have the capacity to make the right choices at the right time. Sometimes he can be quite explosive. That's all part of his diagnosis. And we can't just be replicating that behavior in the same way that if you were at school and one of your friends was behaving in a bad way, you wouldn't replicate it just because they were doing it.
Yeah. I think too, with that 5 years age gap and it being the younger child who's replicating the behaviour, it becomes really quite tricky, because is she just emulating her big sister because her big sister is her hero? Or, a lot of these diagnoses do have genetic components. Is there something in that? I'd encourage you to talk to other people who sort of see your younger daughter outside of the context of the family dynamic. You know, I don't know how old she is, but whether it's at preschool or at childcare or what have you, and talk to them about the sorts of things that they're seeing. Is she just replicating those behaviours when her sister is there or when you're there, to sort of identify that she's being like her big sister, or are they happening sort of more broadly? And that's probably where I'd sort of start with that, is looking at other people who see her outside of your direct family dynamic, and getting a bit of a sense from there, because, you know, it is super common for kids to replicate the behaviours of their brothers or sisters. We've had families who contact us where parents will be worried because all of a sudden they'll have their sibling child will be pretending that they've got the same disability, and, you know, is this normal? It's absolutely normal. You know, that sort of playing with identity and playing with your sense of self is really, really normal for younger kids. But is it something outside of that, is probably a discussion with your broader network.
I think that's a really important point, Shan. I remember distinctly growing up, I was always terrible at maths, still am. Maths is not my thing. I can, yeah, I have lots of other skills, but maths is just not my thing. And I can distinctly remember as a child, you know, aged around 7 or 8, and thinking, I must have a disability too, because this maths just doesn't compute with me. And no matter how hard I try, I just don't get it. So I can remember sticking a note on like the butter container in the fridge. And it's so random, but like it was to my mum and dad saying, I'm terrible at maths. I think I have a disability too. Like, and it was almost like that was my cry for help. And no one ever had the conversation with me about it. It was just like, oh, there's a random weird note on the butter in the fridge. And my eldest son has made statements, you know, along those lines before as well. Like, you know, I can't do this. I think I'm autistic, and like, well, you're not. You're struggling with something. And if you were, that's fine, but you're not. You're just struggling with something, and we can work around it. Yeah.
We've had a couple of questions just about resources, so I'm going to try and package them all up into one question because I am mindful of the time, but just some of the resources that are available for younger children. So we've got a comment around a 6-year-old, almost 7, who struggles when she feels like she's been a big little sister. So the child with the disability is almost 10. We've also had a question around what sort of resources are available for under 18 siblings. Again, would love some resources for my 9-year-old daughter. And then also another question just around, you know, what age would you suggest a child could seek counselling or seeing a professional? So I'm sort of thinking that some of that might be summed up in what you guys do at Siblings Australia. So, and I know we will cover these in future sessions, but I'm imagining that everyone's watching is going to be jumping on the website as soon as we get off here, and it's a week between our next session. So do you want to give a little bit of an overview of some of those supports and resources that Siblings Australia offer?
Yeah, and I'll just do these very briefly. And yeah, please feel free to jump onto our website or reach out if you'd like some additional information. For kids aged 4 to 7, we've got a little ebook called Alex and Arlo that families can download that talks through disability and the sibling experience for kids in that age group. We've then got SibWorks, which is a program that has been developed by Siblings Australia and psychologists around the sibling experience. We offer the training and support for local organisations to run SibWorks within their local communities. So if you're interested in SibWorks, please let us know where you live, and we can have a look and see if there are any providers who are running it at the moment, or who have run it in the past. Or alternatively, if you've got providers within your network who you think might be interested in doing that, we can work with them to deliver that. We have got Sib Support, which is our counselling service that is based around the sibling experience specifically. Rach, who runs that, is running next week's session, and we'll be talking a lot about some of the things that she covers off in that. But Rach has worked with kids sort of from about the age of 4, I think, Nat, I reckon, where Rach has sort of started with that, and also does family counselling. So yeah, sort of that answers often that question about what age for counselling for that. Probably, look, kids need to be able to sort of express how they're feeling, and so that's a bit of a judgment call on where the maturity of your child is up to. And then in the teenage years, we've got Teen Sib, which is an online resource. It's a moderated portal for teenage siblings. Everyone who enters that space has to go through a verification process with Siblings Australia staff to make sure they are who they say they are. But that's an opportunity for teenagers to come together and sort of share their experiences as much as teenagers share their experiences. Nat, have I forgotten anything in that one?
No, I think you've got it all.
And just one last one, because the questions keep coming, but again, around those support for parents. So, we've got one parent saying that they struggle with mum guilt of not being able to give the other child a normal childhood. And then we've had another comment down further down saying, I find it challenging trying to balance the sibling needs where there are multiple children with disabilities in the family. So what is out there for parents?
So we've got an online resource called Sibwise, which is a training program for both parents and professionals that talks through the sibling experience and goes through some of those issues that you have with parent guilt that sort of speaks to what it's like to be a sibling that perhaps if you haven't been that sibling yourself, like Nat can draw on her own personal experience. I don't have that personal experience of having grown up in a family with a child with a disability. So it sort of gives you some of that context for that. I always say to parents who rock up to things like this, show yourself grace. You have recognised that your sibling child needs additional support. Not all parents do that. I've had parents say to me, I just need to know how I can tell my sibling child to do more and take on more and not be upset with what's going on in the family. And when they find out that that's actually not Siblings Australia's approach, get quite upset with me. But if you're recognising that your sibling child does need that additional support, you've taken the first step there. So show yourself compassion for what you're going through. Speak to yourself like you would speak to your best friend about what it is that you're trying to juggle. Nat, do you want to add anything onto that?
No, I think you've summarised it really well. I think from a parent perspective, though, you can't go wrong with advocacy. If you're advocating for your children, not just your child with disability, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And Nat, can I ask you one last question before we finish up? I'm sorry, is that okay, Brie? I'm winding this up.
Otherwise, we'll be here forever because there's more questions, but I think we'll get to them. We'll have to send something out with the resource email for those other questions that have come through.
Cool. Yep. So Nat, if you could tell parents on the call one piece of advice that you'd want them to walk away with today, what would it be?
I think remembering that each child is unique, diagnosis or not, and the bond between siblings will naturally ebb and flow. It can't be forced. What matters is fostering open, honest communication where, all feelings are welcomed and understood. And remind your children that it's okay to feel a mix of emotions. Disability isn't just one person's experience, it impacts the whole family. And that shared journey can also build a deep understanding and connection over time as well. It doesn't always have to be a negative.
Yeah.
Amazing. I have saved the chat. So with those questions that we didn't get around to, I'll get them to you, Shannon and Natalie, and we can hopefully get a response or maybe a resource that answers that. But thank you so much. It's been such a rich and thoughtful conversation. I know many of those watching will be reflecting on what we've discussed today about recognising and supporting the sibling experience. As we wrap up today's session, I would like to remind everyone that this is just the beginning on our journey together. So we have 4 more sessions in this Supporting the Siblings series. I've included the link in the chat to the next session, which is next week. But yeah, each week we'll be building on what we've learned today and diving deeper into specific aspects of sibling support. As I said earlier, for those who have registered, you will receive a recording of today's session within the next few days, along with the resources that have been mentioned. I did include the Siblings Australia website also in the chat. So if you want to check them out right away, we might shut down the Siblings Australia website with everyone going to it. But yes, if today's conversation has sparked questions or reflections that you'd like to explore further, do head over to the Siblings Australia website. It's got some wonderful resources and support options for families. And I also just want to acknowledge, like you've both said, that supporting siblings, like all aspects of family life, is an ongoing journey. So everyone, please be gentle with yourselves as you consider how to apply what we've discussed today. Small steps and thoughtful moments can make a real difference. And thank you to everyone that's joined us live and those that might watch the replay. Your commitment to understanding and supporting all children in your family is what makes conversations like these possible. So thank you, ladies. We look forward to seeing everyone in our next session. Until then, take care. And I think remember, every story in your family matters, including the sibling story. So thank you.
Thanks.
Bye for now, and we'll chat soon. Thank you.